Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, and loin streamer, and today is the first video of the month, which means it is Lmiay time. But before we get started, a couple of things. Number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel and you'd like to see more of it, please hit the like, subscribe, and comment should you feel so inclined. Especially with Lmiay, let me know what your favorite story of the month is. Yes. And number two, if you would like to get a copy of my forthcoming satirical novel, Boom Boom Boom, check out the NetGalley link in the description below. It is coming out in May, and it is spookily topical, considering it's about a Ukrainian along the Russian border and some situations there. And number three, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the links down below for Lmiay and fresh meat feature. So without further ado, I know my hair looks like a disaster today. Please don't make fun of my hair being lopsided. I swear it's not the shape of my head. With all that said, let's go into the stories. So this month's prompt was write a story with a character inspired by an animal or animal behavior. The first story is appropriately by Flies.are.spies. Electric light permeates the sterile white lab. Medical instruments pepper long stainless work tables. Fluid-filled glass jars of varying shapes bubble with green auras. Book-filled shelves cover the walls, each book's filled with theories or formulas for torturing my kind. 4 empty cages of my former neighbors sit vacated. I'm the last. At times, hairless cousins donning white lab coats offer me treats laced with torture. I live in resentment and an overpowered sense of implanted obedience from being immobilized in the 3x3-foot box for my life. My strange cousins speak in gibberish and do unfathomable things to me, nightmarish things. Because of their frustrated inability to form coherent sentences, they torture my arms with sharp, pointy needle things. Afterwards, I feel sick for days. During one torture session, my strange cousins lined a bare spot on my arm with dark symbols. They etched hieroglyphs of alien symbols into my skin, and no amount of licking could remove their meaning. Also, my cousins often pointed and called me Lab Gorilla something something. As I said, they mostly speak in gibberish. It has been so long since my cousins forced my last smoke, and I find myself besieged by powerful desires to leave this cage and grab the tiny container I see on the table. The white box has a red triangle painted on it, and it reads Oroblarum. At first, I hated their smell, but like all repetitive actions, their tempers, even the most torturous of relationships, and I soon discovered I crave the sensation smoking provides. I've developed a longing for my strange cousins to feed me more and more. They hardened my body with many hours of torture, and I believe my inept cousins underestimated my tamed strength. Underestimated has been the only explanation, as my cousins were stupid for letting me outgrow these flimsy confines, not by size, but by brute power. Unable to curb my craving, my desire to savor sweet tobacco outweighs the fear of punishing reprisals. I study my cage's weak metal bars. Unleashing repressed strength lets me bend the buttery soft bars with minimal resistance, bars soft like old television antennas. My arms swell as aggro muscles bulge beneath my fluffy fur. The puny cage snaps with a pathetic clinky sound, testifying to its incompetent design. I find the loose bar's cold heft comforting, and I'm compelled to keep the souvenir. It bangs nicely on the side of my cage, and I find its vibrating satiates violent desires. I scream, contented. Jumping from my cell, I scan the empty air around me and inventory the room from floor to ceiling. Suddenly, the doors open, and I'm greeted by 5 of my strange cousins. Each cousin has outstretched arms, and together they weave an interconnected web, attempting to form a biological blockade across the threshold. I speak, but my words have no effect. I fear they can't understand me because they began shouting in tongues. So I speak louder and louder. Eventually, my shouts morph into screams of frustration. My efforts to pacify them with explanation yields no effect. On the contrary, my efforts only seem to aggravate them. The mob compelled me to violence. I grip my rod with vice-like pressure, and I bang one on its shins. This action seemed to stop its shouting, for a brief moment anyway. So I decide to amplify my effort and begin banging on the whole group, firing off random blows at will. Time slows, enhancing the accelerated motions. I pity the sedated movements of my cousins. It's like they aren't even trying. I shroud their defensive formations under a blurry cloud of violence. My rod lands with soft thuds as red fluid stipples the lab. Like a berserked Viking, my battle arms swing with abandoned discrimination. Muting their whimpering objections, frail bodies drop, having gone limp like dirty laundry, while others continue to moan and scream. Their minds issue commands their bodies no longer receive as their cries echo off the freshly painted walls. Bones break like stale twigs as their will to live succumbs to the impetus of my colossal beating. At last, their screams subside, and I stand at a pool of red sap surrounded by bodies relaxing in oblivion. They look peaceful, but it is hard to tell. I poke their inanimate forms, looking for signs of objection where none are found. Fluid coats the slippery bar. It no longer holds friction, and I find it irritating to maintain my grip. I relax my hand and let gravity relieve me of my burden. The loudness of the dropped pipe sends me into a trance, lost in contemplation. I survey the carnage. Saturated with red guck, my hairy hand grips the small box of the Ouroborums. Calloused fingers fumble with the tiny box. It is obvious the box was never built right because it malfunctions. All of the smokes fall out the bottom and rain onto the wet floor, coating the sticks with red slime. It's hard to pick a single smoke from the saturated mess, but I somehow isolate one and put the red-stained cig between my parted black lips. Fire from the bubbling jar provides the source of ignition, and I bend over, pressing my face close to its flame. With 2 strong drags, the cig ignites, and the ash glows bright with each pull of my inhaling breath. I approach the mirror to inspect the effects time has had on my fuzzy face. It has been years since I last saw my reflection. I tilt my head, squinting through billowing smoke, surveying my appearance. The cigarette dangles from my mouth. Foreign blood creeps down my face, forming webs of tiny caterpillars across my flesh. Blood-caked clumps begin to mat my fur. I lock stares with my reflection and slowly inch closer, leering into hollow eyes, weighing my soul in greater detail. So, this is what a silverback looks like. Time has distilled me, and I fear my life is drawing nearer to its end. Suddenly, my peaceful moment of introspective enlightenment is interrupted by the sight of intruders reflected in the mirror. I smile. More of my strange cousins have come to relax. Without moving my cigarette from my clenched lips, I grab the metal bar. One cousin carries a long black stick. It points the black stick at me as I lunge. There is a large flash, and the black stick booms in deafening thunder. What a way to end that story. I mean, where else could it really go except for maybe Planet of the Apes of some sort with a prison break? But where else could it really go? The mood is so good in this, Flies. Also, the language. There's so much fantastic language in here. I was really into it even just from the beginning. I also, this wasn't so much a lyrical line. There were lyrical lines in here, and I would have to comb through and I would spend some time combing through this if I could highlight on the form I'm using to read this. But I live in resentment and overpowered sense of implanted obedience from being immobilized in this 3x3 box for life. The descriptions and the feelings and the imagery are all so good. And from the perspective of the animal and reinterpreting everything that's happening, and also just for a cigarette, that is life right there. This was so good, dude. Also, I just love the way that you describe things. There's also specifically the disconnect through this POV where he doesn't process exactly what is happening the way that a human would. It also does a disassociation sort of with what's happening, which devalues what is happening and in a good way, where it shows what this character is interpreting from around him. And also, obviously, doesn't care about the death of the humans, if he even recognizes it as death. It could all just be disassociation, or it could be recognizing its death, but really not caring. Either way, the voice of this is great, the descriptions are fantastic, the mood is great, and I really like what you did here. Do you have longer stories that I can read? Because I really like your language. And perspective. Those are the two things that really stand out for me. If I can't stand the language and the characters, then I'm going to have a really rough time with a story. And usually that's super specific to the author, at least for me, as I want to read something from an author perspective that I really like. Because it really defines how the world is painted and how the characters are painted and the depth of different characters. And I have kind of noticed if I don't like how an author writes characters, usually that becomes a constant thing. The next story is by Lord Kaltenberg. It's called Castaway. At the top of this story, Kaltenberg says, I planned on writing something completely different, but I wrote this as an experiment, hence all feedback would be great. So if you guys feel like leaving feedback and giving your general response in the comments down below, please do. I love building this writing community where we can talk about books together and talk about craft together and just have this great time. So if you feel like critiquing, not ripping apart, please do so. Castaway. Coughing and shivering on the ground, he woke up. Waves still crashing on the shore, the sky lit with a sun hidden behind thick clouds. Then he remembered. The ship, the storm, a desperate attempt to flee to a nearby island. Standing up, unsteady, looking around for other survivors, the pain with each and every movement. He was alone. The ship was gone. The boat was gone. Sitting around a small fire with hastily gathered wood, he felt strength and spirit return. Not unlike the weather, his mind was overcast. The waters here were treacherous, and chances of escape were slim. Survival would be difficult. As the rays hit his skin, warming him, the beauty of the island came to shine. The color of the sea, the calls of the gulls above, the green of all that grew in the jungle. Yet he was preparing. A long stick, all wood, sharpening as best he managed without proper tools, burned at the tip, a long spear. He knew not which fruits on this isle were edible, but remembered the many tales of careless adventurers falling to their temptation. No, there was only one sure way to fight off starvation. Hunt. Perspiration. Every breath like taking in the heat of fire. The world was an oven, a humid yet burning oven. A pig-like creature fleeing before him, heart pounding, no room for thought, only chase. And then he struck. Perplexed by his own action, the animal still ran in its madness into the bush. A deep breath and onward, this time slower. The pain of each muscle came back. With it, vertigo. Water will have to be found too, and soon. The carcass of the slain animal was still moving, barely alive anymore. Death would be a release, a heavy thing, and no way to cut it up. Suddenly, the questionable action to go on a hunt so ill-prepared set in. His mind was whirling. In the distance. A beat. First, he could not tell if it came from his heart or a drum elsewhere. Spurred on by the desire of meeting another, he leapt away from the dying animal, into the wild, away. Away from the heavy carcass, away from these torturous circumstances. A drum. There must be a village. Getting closer, he came upon a hill. A sight stopped him in his tracks. Fire, and not of any kind. He threw himself on the ground, shocked. Blue fire. Evil deeds were going on upon this isle. The drums, still audible, proclaiming to the world, evil is here. Crawling from tree to tree, always in the undergrowth, he got closer and closer to the fire. The drums were accompanied with chants, and gruesome they were, unmistakable. The crocodile creature of the South Sea, renowned for its unholy sacrifices. But even they wouldn't use blue fire. They abhorred the use of magic. And then, he could see them. They were three. Scaled creatures with heads of crocodiles standing upright like men, one beating the drum, another chanting with a headdress, and the third kneeling in front of the fire shining bright blue. He decided to watch them and hope to find the vessels that they must have come in. Then the chanting creature pulled out a short curved blade, about to look away, not to witness the gruesome act. Then the ceremony leader suddenly cut his own neck. No blood. Instead, long, thin worms reached out like tentacles. It couldn't be. Out of his place of hiding, he crawled away, again from tree to tree, in the undergrowth as much as possible. He knew what those worms were. They were told in a single legend, passed down for eons. As he felt safe enough again to stand, he ran effortlessly. The words of ancient warrior poet bemoaning the loss of his kin, passing down in legends. The warning. Bloodless are they. None get away. Lives they need, it's how they feed. Again, I love the language here. Kaltenberg, you do a really great job of setting the scene, of painting the picture of where exactly we are, and of And I really like the pacing in the dialogue where it's changing sentence structures. You've got some long and some short, and you've got some with more punchy. Like it's following a beat of a drum, it feels like in the narrative style, at least a little bit. Like it gives that sort of vibe of a rhythm of dun dun dun. And also, I'm not gonna lie, this made me think of, I don't know if you've ever played it, but Green Hell is a survival video game where you're stranded on an island and you basically become Bear Grylls. And if your sanity gets too low, or as your sanity drops in that game, because you lose sanity depending on what you're doing, and if you're in the dark too long, and also if you've got worms under your skin, you start going crazy. But as your sanity drops, you start hearing things, and eventually you start seeing things. And that was a fun game to play with my best friend, because when we first started playing, one, we died a lot until we got the hang of it, but we died a lot. But number two, and we were going insane very fast over and over and over again. But aside from that, the first time that we had delusions in that game, I don't remember if it was him or I, but one of us had gone so crazy in game that we started seeing villagers and were getting attacked by villagers that the other person couldn't see. And it was not a glitch. It was, in fact, your character had gone so crazy that they had visual hallucinations. So as this was going on and it brought in the beat and the drum, it made me feel like, or it made me think about that game and falling into insanity and becoming crazy. But then obviously this ending part feels more like an Eldritch sort of thing. And I think you were the one that submitted an Eldritch story in a previous submission. But I'm really into this. Most of the feedback, the general feedback that I would have for this is that it feels like a longer story. It doesn't, not necessarily like a novel, but it feels like we're missing more mood and more visuals that would also then prepare us for the warnings at the end. Like maybe this character is finding things along the island that he doesn't quite understand until the words of the ancient warrior poet make sense at the end, or where he's putting those words of the ancient warrior poet into a framework so that he can better understand what it is that he's seeing. But it just feels like there's something missing to attach that ending, which I really like, the warning of the legend in this. And I love seeing the three different weird guys doing their ritual and the guy cutting his own neck and worms coming out. I love it. I just think that I know that I have a hard order of having this be like 1,000 words, so it has to be short. But I think there is more to this story to develop, and I would love to read this again if you expand it and fill it out some more, because I really like your language, and I like the ideas that you've got going on here. It's really interesting. I don't know if that's very helpful to just say to expand on this and to build the poet back into the story somehow, because I'm not entirely sure I got the punch of what is at the end, but that could also just be that I'm not familiar enough with Eldritch mythology or whatever is inspiring that ending, and so there is that. The next story is by Taylor Ridley. Cass, he called as he approached the oak door of the two-story hut. Cass, he called as he approached the oak door of the two-story hut. From beneath the shadow awning of the thatched roof, the black beady eyes of birds watched him. He stepped inside to a small, dim hearth room lit by streams of daylight coming through gaps in the roof. "Cassival," he called again. "Brother," a cool voice answered. "It's been some time. I almost didn't believe the flock's whispers. How is father?" A lanky man, garbed in dark clothes and a thin green robe, stepped to the edge of the second-floor balcony. Long blue feathers trailed behind him and lined his arms. "I'm not here for a family reunion, Cass." "Echo. Davian," Cassival snapped. "I know you were never fond of the name, but if this isn't going to be a family visit, then I'd appreciate it if you addressed me properly." His mane of silver-blue feathers rose and fell irritably, and he cocked his head at an odd angle to look down at Davian. Davian hated it when he did that. It always looked wrong, like there really was a bird behind those eyes instead of a man. Sometimes he wondered just how much of his humanity was left after all these years. Maybe it wasn't a man playing the part of a bird, but a bird disguising itself as a man. Davian grimaced, but nodded compliantly before continuing. "I'm looking for someone. I suspect he passed through these woods in the last few days." Echo extended his feathered arms and leapt down from the second floor, beating the air in a single flap to slow his descent. His taloned feet clacked against the stone floor as he lazily paced toward him. There have been many people in and out of the forest lately. You'll have to be a tad more specific. You'd have noticed him. Pale green skin, black horns, and 3 swords strapped over a leather vest, Davian said. Echo was silent for a moment, though he seemed to be crooning under his breath. His eyes stared into nothingness before they refocused on his brother. And say that I find him and lead you to him. What would you do with him? It's not for me to decide. He stole from the nobles of the Vine Country. His fate will be up to them. Why do you care? Dear brother, I am a shadow broker. It is my job to know the details. Echo waved a dismissive hand. So, will you help? I will, on one condition. I just so happen to know that he has something else on him. Nothing of consequence to you or your nobles in the Vale, but quite valuable to me. I can go after him myself, and my flock can only do so much, but... Echo gave him a cold vulture's grin that always managed to send an uncomfortable chill through him. What is it? Damien played along. A small black box, Echo answered, and then added, and don't worry about trying to open it. I promise you, it won't crack if it is what I believe it to be. Davian sighed. And what do you believe is inside the box? That's of no concern to you. If it's stolen, then I must return it. You will return neither the box nor the noble's possessions if you don't agree to the terms. This particular individual is excellent at hiding if you give him the time to arrange himself. Are you willing to risk your good record by letting him slip through your fingers? Besides, even I don't know where he got it. All I know is that it's worth more to me than it is to you. Davian hesitated, fruitlessly trying to read his brother's masked intentions. As much as he disliked the prospect of being Cassaville's errand boy, it would be the end of his career if this thief went free. Very well, Davian growled. Excellent. I'm glad that we could come to an understanding. Follow my flock. They'll guide you. Echo waved his arm, stirring a dozen blue mockingjays from their roosts in the rafters. Like a cloud, they raced through the open window to the forest outside, vanishing into the trees. Davian grudgingly nodded and turned to leave, with Echo's warning at his back. And Davian, he said, know that I will be watching from the boughs. I got really strong characterization for both of these characters in this short story. Like, you did an excellent job with bringing out the not just the characters' different personalities, but what makes them specific. What makes them specific. And I got a clear picture of Mr. Birdman up in here, with also keeping it minimal what the description of the exterior is. Like, you used your words very effectively to get through like the entire scene, and make it make sense, while also picturing specifically the characters. Like, the characters are very strong in this. And I'm also invested specifically in Birdman. Like, nothing against Davian over here, but I'm very interested in what Birdman is doing and who he is and all of that noise. I'm also wondering if this is part of a bigger story, or if this was just written for this specific prompt. Because if it was written for this prompt, I would recommend pursuing that story. It's interesting, and it's a strong start, or a strong presentation. The last story is by Tim Blaine. The air was hazy and stank of cigarette smoke and liquor, and also a little bit of vomit. But that was an undertone at best, and Charlie could ignore it if he just focused on the drink in front of him as he sat at the bar and took in all the regulars gathered around him this Tuesday evening. The gang all seemed to be in attendance. To his left were a couple of local yokels that Charlie recognized as employees of Donnie Cargill, the owner of the town's only gas station, tow truck, and mechanic shop. Of course, Donnie himself wasn't here. No, he belonged to the upper echelon of this podunk little grease stain in northeastern Pennsylvania, and being a man of dignity such as that, he tended to drink alone at home. To Charlie's right, a couple of kids, barely old enough to drink by the look of them, were playing a pool. They had a nervous look about them, and Charlie suspected that they weren't quite old enough to drink just yet, and had gotten in with a couple of convincing IDs, or by the grace of the bartender, Megan, whose give-a-shit meter had landed on E long ago, and who was known for letting anybody in so long as they didn't cause any trouble. Just beyond the billiard players was a lone woman standing next to the karaoke machine. Her hair was close cropped to her neck, and she looked to be somewhere in her 40s. A good somewhere in her 40s, though. Charlie would have given her a romp had he had enough booze in him, and if he was feeling particularly rowdy or particularly like he had something to prove. It wasn't her looks that had his attention tonight, though. It was the jacket she wore, a garish orange thing with black sleeves. It looked like a Leatherman jacket, yet no team in the area, as far as Charlie knew, wore those colors. The colors brought him back, though. They reminded him of something. He slammed his tequila, wincing at the taste and the burn as he considered the woman in her jacket. The singing woman. Singing like a... "Look, Dad, a bird!" Young Charlie Murray could hardly contain his excitement as he squealed out those words to his father. His boyish voice was still years away from breaking, and so in a high pitch he repeated himself as he pointed with his tiny hand toward the grain grinder. "A bird, Dad! A bird landed in the grain!" William Murray trailed his gaze along his son's finger and saw, sure enough, what seemed to be a red-breasted robin roosting on grain as it slowly made its way toward the point of suction in the grinding machine. The bird looked almost like a ship caught by a maelstrom, but a maelstrom of corn kernels and wheat. "Why doesn't it fly away, Dad?" Charlie bore a look of concern as his eyes shifted from the bird, with a red-orange breast and those dusty black wings, to his old man who was coming along the walkway toward his son and the silo from where the grain was being pulled. "Well," William said as he pulled a can of tobacco from his pocket and began to pack a lip, something his son had seen him do a million times and which would, someday in the future, lead to William's death at the hands of the esophageal cancer. "I reckon he can't, son. You know how dangerous I've told you those silos can be, how the grain can take you." William punctuated the next word with a whistle and a downward motion of his index finger. "Just like it were quicksand." Charlie turned from his father and watched in awe as the bird continued to peck at and gobble at the pieces of corn and grain, seemingly unknowing or uncaring of its impending death. Charlie loved to help his father around the farm, and he had always been fascinated by the machinery that they used for their family's livelihoods, but after the day, going to the grain grinder would seem like a chore to Charlie more than an event, more than something to enjoy. He would sometimes dream of it, though he'd seldom remember that bird stupidly pecking and gorging and dining away as it was taken deeper into the machine to ultimately drown. Not drown on water, but drown on dry, dusky kernels of harvest. The sound of someone along the bar choking on a particularly rough drink brought Charlie fully back to the present moment. He looked away from the karaoke singing woman, now belting out tunes like she believed that she may be working for money, and saw the bartender, Megan, had placed another shot in front of him. He grabbed it, but, raising it to his lips, he found himself thinking about tomorrow, the hangover he would be suffering during work, the anxiety he would feel through the day, wondering if he had done something stupid the night before, but forgotten about it in a drunken haze. He thought about birds, stupid, dead-eyed birds, gobbling up as much grain as they could while they got sucked downward, not caring about what would come next, be it oblivion or bird heaven, just wanting that next kernel, that next meal. Charlie thought of all this for just a moment, and then he knocked back his shot and placed the glass toward the far edge of the bar, waiting for his next drink. I like I don't think illusion is the appropriate word here, but the parallel of the birds from his childhood with his drinking behavior here. I'd actually really freaking this month's submissions blowing my mind with character right now, because I would love to see more of Charlie's story. I'm so interested in this dude and just his life. I mean, this is perfect. This is enough, though I think it could be played out a little bit more to sort of ease ease the bookcasing of current day Charlie with previous Charlie, but the characterization of Charlie and also his father and the use of the bird. See, I think a little bit more setup at the beginning to have a little more that would trickle into the parallels with the birds that would then be clarified at the end would power boost this. But I like this a lot. And I think it's a really strong short story. Though it may be longer. I don't know. But if this was just a snapshot out of Charlie's life and this was a bigger thing, I would read more about him. So that's all there is for Lmiay this month. If you liked any of those short stories, tell me which of the stories was your favorite down in the comments below. If you've got any feedback, or if you would like to follow any of these writers for their creative stuff, those that submitted their social media will be linked down in the description below. I look forward to the submissions for next month. You guys are insanely talented, and I love getting to see what y'all come up with. So remember, April's Lmiay is now available, and also Silvio and user 7ABB2340. So thank you so much, you guys, and I hope you have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left. Plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?